Hello everyone, welcome to another Quad Education Test Prep Fundamentals video. My name is Tom, and today we're going to be talking about a question from the reading section of both tests that is a landmine that you absolutely need to be able to avoid in order to be successful on the tests. Fortunately, it's a pretty easy landmine to spot because the question type is pretty obvious and they're almost always in the same place. That question type is the main idea or purpose of the passage. So let's take a look. Okay, main idea and purpose. Pretty self-explanatory, but let's just define. Basically, it's that question that asks, what's the general point of this passage? Or what's the purpose of the passage? Or what's the main idea of the passage? And it effectively asks you to just summarize the whole thing you're reading. So where do we find them? Well, conveniently enough, they're almost always in the same place, which makes them very easy to spot. You see, they're basically always the first and sometimes the second question in the passage. So if you start working through a passage and you immediately see which of the following is the main idea of the passage, then congratulations, you've found the main idea question. And a quick point on this, by the way, the main idea of a passage question is not the same thing as the main idea of a paragraph question. So if the test is asking you, what's the main idea of paragraph 2 from lines 20 to 32, then that is not a main idea question, and you should not approach it the way that I'm describing to you in this video. Maybe, probably a topic for another day. Stick around to see that one. But anyway, why are these questions tough? Well, pretty simply, they require just a lot of research and comprehension, which is hard. So on these reading tests, you have to work really quickly to absorb a ton of information about a wide variety of topics that are often both complicated and unfamiliar. Now, answering a question about a specific vocab word or line reference isn't really that bad because you don't really need that much context. You can just sort of find the line and do it. But doing a main idea question requires all of the context, and that's a lot of effort, especially with the time constraint that you have. And so, if main idea questions are the first questions in the passage and also difficult, how do you think we should approach them? Well, if you've been paying attention in our previous videos, you may be able to guess. So what do you think? Yep, just skip them. We're going to skip them. That's correct, and it's kind of obvious if you consider that I called them landmines at the beginning of the video, and you want to avoid landmines, right? And so we don't really want to step on them right away. And there are two main reasons for this. The first is that these are just some of the hardest questions in the reading section, just out of all of them. And it's generally just always good practice to save things that are difficult for the end of the test you're doing. And the second is actually more strategic. So when I first get done reading a passage, I generally find that I'm a little shaky on what the meaning of the passage actually is. It's sort of out of focus, and I've just read this big long passage, and I'm just sort of not quite sure yet what it's about. And so it's like a lot of words, and I'm reading really quickly, and I'm kind of what's going on? I'm confused. But think about this. If instead of just sort of racking our brains and trying to do that main idea question first, what if instead we do the 6 or so other questions in the passage that are about specific details? Now what happens? Well, you'd be correct to guess that they only ask questions about details that are actually important to the meaning of the passage. And if you do 6 questions that are important to the meaning of the passage, well, you probably have a good idea what the passage is about now. And so there you go. If you do 6 specific questions, you're sort of doing that main idea of the passage question at the same time. And so that's just for me a really good justification about why you want to avoid landmines, in case you felt strongly about stepping on them intentionally. And so moving on to application of this principle, it's a little difficult to demonstrate this do it last principle in a short video like this because I'm not going to have you do 6 other questions before we even talk about one of these. So that's going to be something you have to do on your own in your own time practicing. But instead, we're just going to have to practice this summarizing exercise with shorter passages. And so I've got a really short passage, if you can call a paragraph a passage here, that you may remember from my sentence placement video, which I've recycled for you here. So take a second to summarize this passage in your own words. And so what's the main idea here? Well, it's just a quick description about how I make my delicious avocado egg toast breakfast. And this is a real thing, by the way. This is a wildly healthy, nutritious, and filling breakfast. So feel free to steal my, process here for making this for yourself. But that's enough description. Let's go ahead and do a couple of example problems. Okay, zooming out a bit here to our example problems. We have 2 of these, and so we're just going to do them one at a time. Take a second here for this first one and see what you can do. All right, let's take a look. I'll just go ahead and read this really quickly. One innovative playwright has woven the deficiency of the system into her crowdfunding model. She presented the total cost for producing her play on a crowdfunding site. She then divided the total cost by the number of people she expected to attend the performance. The result of the calculation was the minimum donor price, and only donors who paid at least the minimum ticket price were allowed to attend. Though the price for the tickets was higher than that of tickets for comparable shows, it was still affordable by most theatergoers and reflected the real cost of the performance. By subverting the presumption that money used for her project is an altruistic donation, the playwright showed that our work has monetary value to those who enjoy it. Interesting. So what's the main purpose of the passage? Again, it's not a real passage here, it's just a paragraph. So before we look at the answers provided, we're going to want to make our own little summary. And from what I can tell from this, it's sort of just an explanation of what this person did with, I guess, crowdfunding. You know, there's not really a persuasive element here. It's just saying she did this thing. She figured out what the calculation was. She did a little bit of math, which is great. And then she figured out how much she should charge for tickets, and she did. It was a little more expensive, but people still paid for it. And so we look at our answers here to make the argument that ticket prices for plays are always too high. This I'd say is out of scope because there's nothing in here saying that it's too much. It's just saying that it's slightly higher than usual. And another really important point here is the word always. This is what we call extreme language, and extreme language in reading questions is almost always incorrect because it's just so narrow. So we're going to say no. Next, we have to explain why and how tickets for charitable events can be more expensive than tickets to a conventional event. Charity, I don't know if this is charity. I'm kind of confused. Maybe I'd have to look back, but my gut reaction would be no to this because it just seems sort of out of scope. To describe how a playwright was able to use crowdfunding to fund her play in an innovative way, I don't see anything immediately wrong with this, and that, by the way, is a good sign for a good answer. This is not really feeling strongly one way or another about anything, and if you're kind of vague in this way, it's harder to be wrong. So I'm going to say maybe. And then finally, to illustrate the dangers of crowdfunding by giving an example of where a playwright was required to charge too much for a play. And I'm going to go ahead and say no to that because there's not really danger here. It's just sort of a situation. So I'm going to go ahead and go with C because that's what you might say is just like less bad than everyone else, all the other answers. And that you will find is a great way to solve the more difficult questions on the test. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, almost a real passage for this one. That's 35 lines or so. I'm not going to read through all of this just because it's a lot of words. You don't need to listen to me read for that long. So let's just sort of talk about what it's about here. You know, broadly, it talks about there being lots of cars, but then it talks about buses. Half of the population of Toronto, they don't even have cars. And so lots of passengers. Public transportation is the opposite of glamour, so they're saying it's not that great here. In North America, at least, they are correct. So public transit is sort of famously bad in North America, especially in the United States of America, which is a shame. And waiting a long time for a bus, given an opportunity who wouldn't drive, they're saying that you can always get, you know, someplace pretty quickly if you're driving in your car. So if we look at all this text, the extent of what we can see as far as the main idea of the passage is, it's basically that there is public transportation and then there is private transportation. So not super specific once again. Public transportation is always, again, if the extreme language, going to probably avoid that one. The superior option to private car travel, well, in some countries it is, but not necessarily in America. Car travel is always always the faster option compared with public travel. This says almost always, which is not the same thing as always, so very important to be aware of there. There are positive and negative elements associated with public transportation. Again, I kind of like that one because it's not really making a stand. And private car travel should be passed out entirely. Looks like that's actually a typo there. Excuse me. That should be phased out. But again, entirely too much extreme language. Maybe we'll do a video someday about the difference between past and past, by the way, just now that I'm looking at the word past here. But phased out is what I meant there. My apologies. Anyway, with this one, once again, we're looking at C being the best answer in this case, just because it's not really too extreme on one end or another. It's not really, it's general enough to not be incorrect. Okay, that's it for this video. Hopefully I've been able to illustrate why it's important that you skip the main idea questions and save them for later. Not only does it make life easier for you, but it's also strategically the best move. If you found this material useful, we hope that you will like and share the video and subscribe to Quad Education. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.